In today's complex environment, almost every major project, from mining to transmission lines, is contentious. Hi, my name is Allie Meeres.
And I'm Byng Giraud.
Welcome to Primary Risk, where each month we speak with the people behind the projects shaping our world.
We'll be hosting candid conversations and hearing from industry leaders, political figures, engineers, and project proponents. We'll be exploring the soft issue risks, challenges, and solutions, and behind-the-scenes stories of what it took to get these complex projects across the finish line. Or not.
Hello, welcome.
Good to be here, Allie. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Happy Hanukkah. Feliz Navidad, whatever you might celebrate. And of course, Happy New Year. You might notice that this episode is a little different than our previous episodes. It's just Byng and I here today, and our format is going to be focused on major projects. We have a couple categories that we're going to talk through: project successes, project failures, some projects that are kind of in between. We're probably going to talk a little politics because we can't help ourselves. Our last round is going to be focused on
Double jeopardy.
Yeah, like daily double jeopardy style. It's going to be focused on what policy change we would make if Santa gave us one Christmas gift. Policy version. What would we ask for?
Can Santa ask for coal?
I'm actually going to talk about coal because I've been on a real coal high lately. So let's jump in.
All the kids are into it.
Yeah. Sit back. Hope everyone has a nice cup of coffee in their hand, maybe a glass of wine like Byng and I, and we can get started.
Got to get that explicit rating up.
That's right. So 2024, big year, and not a big year, which is what we're going to talk about a little. But Byng, what project in your mind was the biggest project failure in 2024 in British Columbia?
Well, I think you're going to talk about this a little bit more, but the biggest pullout in terms of an investment was the Prince George Hydrogen Project. Fortescue?
Fortescue, yeah, $2 billion.
That was probably the biggest sucking sound in terms of a loss of a $2 billion capital investment that the region, the First Nation, the Premier, everybody was all excited about. So in terms of a loss of economic impact, sort of foregone revenue for the people of British Columbia, that was probably the biggest. I'll rant every year until it's done about one of the biggest project failures since forever, but we still haven't built the Massey Tunnel. I live on the other side of the Massey Tunnel, so I have to always talk about that ongoing project failure as far as I'm concerned.
One thing about the Massey Tunnel that I remember is at the time the Massey Tunnel was canceled when the NDP got in 2017. I was working for Woodfibre, and I was working closely with the council of the District of Squamish in Squamish for Woodfibre. And there was this public media release that the Delta City Council put out that said, we are unanimously supporting the Massey Bridge project. Please build a bridge. We're very worried about the tunnel. And I thought, that's weird. I mean, you rarely see city councils unanimous on a decision. And certainly working in Squamish, I had that experience. So, what does that tell you about the political climate at the time?
Well, it goes way back. In 1996, dating myself now, so that's almost 30 years ago, I told then Premier Glenn Clark, I was at some cocktail party or something, and I said, Premier, bridge, tunnel, zip line, I don't care what you do, just do something. That was 28 years ago. And here we are. It was supposed to be BC's gateway. I was stuck in the tunnel this morning. I got up early enough that it wasn't so bad, but back-to-back trucks for the Steveston interchange. I don't know. Sometimes I feel the Ministry of Transportation hates South Delta. But
he certainly doesn't live there.
There's a new minister now, so I have to be generous. But, and I'm not just talking about New Democrats versus BC Liberals versus whatever else, is that one of your major transportation corridors, which has been a problem for 30 years, because of our politics, but also our inability to permit things in a timely fashion, remains an outstanding, blight on the ability to move goods and people in this city. 30 years, right? That's not a 2024 failure. That's a past 30 years of my life failure. By the time they actually start to build the thing, I'm going to be old enough that I'll be against it because I'll just be old and angry.
You'll be against everything.
Yeah, just stop that project.
It's the last stage of life for everyone.
Yeah.
Well, it was permitted though, right? In 2017. I mean, they actually were literally about to award a contract for the bridge. And the one thing I loved about the bridge, and I'm more of an advocate for the bridge than the tunnel, is the fact that it had opportunity for a transit line to go across, which I know we hear our premier and others talk all the time about transit.
You know, Allie, I guess maybe because I just want to see something. I'm a little bit agnostic about what the heck they want to do. And I've heard great arguments for and against all the different options. But I think the challenge here is politics has interfered so much in something like this. And each time they change their decision, it takes us back to what we're going to talk, some of the other things we're going to talk about today. There's a new regulatory process. Like, how many times do you have to look at the impact of X on Y, right? How many times? I mean, sure, there'll be slightly different impacts from a bridge to a tunnel, but water quality probably won't change that much. I don't know. I mean, the notion that every time you look at a project differently, and this is starting to happen more and more, then suddenly it's a whole new environmental assessment or a whole new raft of regulatory processes. Lots of projects have been attempted and didn't proceed in British Columbia that were attempted and proceeded with later. Site C, for example, which we're going to talk about more. Why can't the data that was collected at a certain point, some of it does become dated. I mean, some of the data does become dated, but it doesn't all. And it's almost like we start from scratch again. We fill another room full of binders, and we sort of forget there's a room of binders somewhere else in the province that's collecting dust.
How different is the bathymetry reports in 2024 going to be from 2023, right? And we got to build something. So that's your project failure, your continued project failure of 2024, George Massey Tunnel. And you touched on Fortescue. So, you know, I thought it was really interesting. Von Palmer, who obviously has done, you know, has decades of experience writing with the Vancouver Sun on that project. I'll quote him. He said, "Investors will build wherever the price, regulations, and other conditions are the most attractive. For Fortescue, that means US, Norway, Australia, and Brazil, but not BC."
Yeah, I mean, listen, economics are a big part of this, but I was always sort of curious about the project because of its choice of location. I mean, you're using electricity to take natural gas and break it apart so you have hydrogen, and then you're going to put it on a train or in a pipeline, I guess, and ship it to the coast and then put it on a ship. I was curious as to, I mean, I guess because it was close to the gas pipeline, but it didn't seem to me that that was the logical location, that you should actually be doing the separation elsewhere. And I'll say that because we get stuck in BC, probably elsewhere in the Western world, on whatever the sexy energy mix of the day is, and that hydrogen sexy because it doesn't produce emissions. Well, hydrogen requires a whole separate level of infrastructure. I mean, as I understand it, its molecular composition is different. So you can't just use an existing natural gas or oil pipeline, like just replace it and put this stuff in it. You can't just use an existing tanker because of how the safety, how the molecule reacts with the walls of whatever the holding chamber is. You'd have to create a whole new infrastructure. And we can see it right now when we talk about electric cars versus gas cars. Like, how hard is it to build a whole new system to basically support switching all your product over to something new? So we would have to build new pipelines, and we all know how hard that is. We would have to build new fleets of vehicles. So the project always struck me as a bit odd, and I was always sort of curious as to why provincial government sort of piled in and doubled down and said this was a great idea without sort of thinking more about the science and infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So I'm less about, this was a sort of failure of regulatory processes, which is much of my complaint. But really, I think it was a challenging project. The concept was challenging.
And the CEO did come out and say, and this is something that on our previous podcast with Susanna and certainly with Tessa, we talked about, which is this company is a global company. It's competing in multiple jurisdictions with different projects. So at the end of the day, they have a long laundry list and they have to choose what their winners are going to be. And does BC have a climate for that in this region with these politics, to build, like you said, with limited infrastructure? And we are Canada, right? We are not Norway. We are a big country. So getting things to places is hard. And I think that's something that the CEO might have come to a conclusion on. So that was quoted as another reason that potentially they pulled out, was just it didn't make the cut.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because, that's the kind of thing, that's the scale of project that British Columbia should be attracting with our geography, with our geology, with our energy resources, with our trees and water and all the assets we have. Those are the scale of projects we should be attracting and reflecting the success of LNG Canada, which we can talk about as well, right? So LNG Canada is getting close to running its It's for it's doing its prep for its commercial shipping. It's doing some preliminary shipping, preliminary preparation. I mean, biggest private sector investment in the province's history, and probably will be for some. Well, they'll set the record. It'll be Gretzky-like, right? They'll have the record for a very long time.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of LNG Canada, we can talk about our other nat gas friends at Enbridge. So one more kind of failure to close out on is the West Coast Connector project. So they, of course, pulled out from that. Well, technically they didn't cancel it. Technically their environmental certificate had expired.
Yeah.
And they didn't, try and push through that with policymakers. So maybe you can give our audience a little color on that project and maybe why Enbridge made that decision.
Well, if you're not from BC, or even if you're from BC and don't really follow regulatory approval processes like we do, which I don't blame you.
Why? They're super fun.
Yeah, it's scintillating stuff. So when you get an environmental certificate in British Columbia, it's good for 5 years. And then at 5 years, you can apply for a 5-year extension before you have to build the thing. And the extension is usually given, right? Because 5 years isn't a long time when it comes to trying to build a big project. But after 10 years, to get the extension beyond that is, well, essentially impossible. There have been some minor exceptions. One recently, KSM, because of COVID. But generally, you don't get it past that. So Enbridge had their certificate and hadn't entered what's called substantial construction. So that's the trick. You have to get substantial construction, which is a subjective thing, right? Government sort of decides. You kind of look substantial.
Shovel in the ground.
You kind of look substantial to me.
Barge some equipment over to site.
How much money have you spent? But so anyway, Enbridge was getting really close to this, and of course the LNG projects by which it was supposed to feed, they had all packed up and gone home.
Prince Rupert, right?
Yeah, it was going into Rupert, and so I understand why they wouldn't want to throw sort of good money after bad, because to get to the point they'd spent hundreds of millions of dollars on the regulatory process, right? This is not a cheap process. So I can understand, I'm not going to throw several $100 million at this because I need a customer at the end of it. I need an LNG facility at the end of it. And there are some proposed LNG facilities, and we'll talk about that. But they're not coming online fast enough. So again, all that money spent on process, on consultants, on reaching agreement with people, 10 years weren't able to hit the construction. They didn't have a customer, and so they had to pull the plug. Other environmental assessments in the world aren't necessarily like that. That's kind of a BC thing. I mean, other jurisdictions may have some expiry terms, but that 5 and 5, which seems like a long time to a lot of people, in this world where your environment, getting to your environmental assessment will take you over 10 years. In this world, that's probably old-fashioned. Government should probably reconsider that.
Mm-hmm. Look at potentially either automatically extending or making it easier.
You have to do some sort of amendment or something. Update your data, because 10 years is not a long time when you think of all the factors.
Well, and you think about where we're at right now economically in British Columbia, and having another natural gas pipeline would be real nice for our economy right now. And we have the resources, and we're close to Asia, and there's a lot of pros.
Our allies and our friends are chomping at the bit for this. They've come to this country and asked us to do this. Mm-hmm. Somehow we can't meet our end of the bargain. Well,
perhaps we can pivot to a in-between project success and failure. Are we going to talk about wind?
Yeah, wind, sure. We talk, sometimes I think we obsess a little bit here in this podcast about a little more of the get your hands dirty type projects, the hydrocarbons and the mining, partially because those are the projects that face the bigger challenges. But wind, a big announcement by the province, great. BC Hydro did a power call, 9 projects won, 8 of them had majority Indigenous partnership, and I think the 9th had was 49% Indigenous. So Indigenous-led projects, green projects, cool, great. But
oh my gosh. I mean, okay, so I will say I'm very excited, right? First Nations Major Projects Coalition has a ton of projects in there with their First Nations partners, and they wrote an awesome electrification national strategy this past year. It's just so great to see these milestones being hit, and I am largely positive about this. I think the hesitancy I have with this one, Byng, is that it's twofold. One, it is sort of the government admitting to the fact that the environmental assessment process is so onerous that in order for them to prioritize these projects to get across the line, they have to take the whole process away.
Yeah, no EA for big green wind projects.
And
Get out of jail free card.
it doesn't sit well with me. Now I hope this is just
There's
the
consultants
beginning.
all over the province crying.
Yeah.
Oh my
I
God.
mean, it's a great day for interjects.
It's a bad day if you're.
It's a very nice Christmas for interjects.
If you're wind study experts or something.
Yeah, and that's what kind of makes my stomach hurt is, and we do talk about a lot of hydrocarbon heavy projects, but if the policies that help projects get across the line, if you're just going to take away all of that, does that mean that wind doesn't have any impacts on the environment?
Well, it's a good question, all right. So if you're admitting the environmental assessments impede projects, so it's a public policy goal of the province to do more green energy. That's a public policy. They're elected government. Fill your boots. But you're admitting that process is too onerous to effectively move these projects fast enough. I mean, if you're in a climate emergency, yeah, you should be moving projects fast. But that admission followed by essentially a removal of a process, what are you going to replace it with? Mm-hmm. Are you saying that they don't have environmental impacts? They do. We know what they're made out of. We know that the birds and those kinds of things are impacted by projects. We do know there's mitigations, but it's an admission that the process is too onerous to achieve the outcomes we want. Well, there are other outcomes we want, and I think we talk about it here a lot. One of the outcomes we want is a vibrant, growing economy with a sound GDP, so our citizens can afford the healthcare and education they want. So if that's slowing down green energy projects, maybe you better have a look at the other projects. Now, to be fair, I guess the Premier at a recent event did say, stay tuned, but
I'm staying so tuned, tuned as tuned can be. And I think the second pet peeve I have, and this is me just being pedantic and like you said, reading about environmental assessments and digging into minerals. But, I love the mining industry, worked in the mining industry before oil and gas. There are so many minerals that go into making these turbines. I mean, you need met coal is one of the biggest components, copper, concrete, like aggregate mining.
Yeah, and concrete is a big GHG
huge
producer, right?
And so you're saying that the wind farms aren't going to have an environmental.
I'm sure there's going to be some process, but it is an admission that the process is thwarting your public policy outcomes. It's a total admission to that.
Right. And just that the materials that go into it are going to continue to be heavily regulated. And I think that's just where I have to pick a little bit of a bone.
Well, it's always, I read this study years ago, it was Australia, like what were the more popular companies in the public thought of companies. At the top were all the tech companies. No, the cool companies. At the bottom were all the resource companies. But at the bottom, that stuff goes into the guys at the top. So it's sort of funny that you can be, in love with the end user of a product, but hate the product that went into it. So, anyway.
Oh yeah, the tech industry.
Yeah. So mining. So I was making some notes before because what we were going to talk about. So a couple of sort of, I wouldn't sort of, they're not big wins, but hey, I'll take any win I can get.
Honorable mentions.
Honorable mentions. So Eskay Creek is now an environmental assessment. That's a project up in Tahltan territory in BC's northwest.
Awesome.
They're doing a great job. Have full support of the Tahltan Nation. I think the Tahltan actually own a small portion of it. Heavily employing the folks there. So good for the folks at Eskay, Skeena Resources to move that project forward. KSM, which could be one of the largest copper mines potentially in the world, also in Tahltan territory, also with some good agreements with the local First Nation. They, as we were talking, they have completed substantial construction, so their certificate now is permanent. Awesome. I think they're in court fighting about that. So if
you're not in court, you're not a project.
You're not. There's no win without a wrinkle, right? So anyway, congrats to SK, congrats to KSM, and somebody who reached the end of that process, and now they got to build the thing, is a Cisco with their project up Wells Caribou Gold. So it's the kind of successes we have to celebrate because none of those guys are actually operating and making any real money yet. But one's moving into construction, one's got its EA certificate, and one's entering the process in a very favorable way. So let's take those as wins. Yeah,
huge wins, especially at Cisco. I mean, when you look at the impact of mines, I mean, I think they have something like over 600 workers they're going to employ on site. And I mean, to that local economy in that region, it's hurting right now.
Well, anybody who knows BC, and again, we're being a little parochial here, is forestry's really taken a hit, and we've shut down a ton of mills. Those are local jobs that can replace that loss of forestry jobs, because we have lost a lot of forest mills in this past year.
And the training is very similar. When I worked at Northwest Community College, we were recruiting for mineral processing operator positions, and one of the mills in Houston had just shut down. And we took all the people that were working at the mill and basically put them through this process, and they ended up working at Huckleberry.
Yep.
So it's a real similar skill set. So hopefully with the increase in mining, we'll see some of those jobs displaced.
And that's the nice thing about British Columbia. When we come to our natural resources, and we can talk about agriculture as well. We have such a diversity. We have excellent fishing resources. We have excellent agricultural resources. We have excellent forestry resources. Excellent geology for mining. We have substantial oil and tons of natural gas in the Northwest. So BC, we really have a kind of a natural resource hedge fund. We can be successful all the time. Again, if we can get out of our own way.
Absolutely. So a couple other big notable successes other than the mining projects you just spoke to. So I think TMX deserves a big round of applause.
Yeah.
Media's not really giving them one, so I'm here to give them one. Big shout out to Ian Anderson. Obviously, there was another CEO in place, Don Farrell, for the last couple of years. But I mean, Ian really slogged through that project.
He's 2 feet shorter than he was before.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that project took 12 years to complete.
Once they were in the process. So that doesn't include all the planning and prep you have to do to get into the process.
But and I went from $5 billion to $35 billion. So there's, some things about the project that were tough. However, it's completed, shipping nearly 1 million barrels a day, which is very good for our tax base.
It is so good for Canada because, again, if you don't follow this sort of thing, typically Canada, we sell our stuff, in this case, oil and gas, to the Americans. And the Americans, LNG Canada's come online, and there's a couple other projects moving, but in the same period of time, they built 6 or 8 or 10 or whatever it was, new LNG facilities. So essentially, we were exporting them gas. They would get the value added of turning it into a liquefied product and putting it on ships and making all the money and getting all the jobs. Mm-hmm. So they were buying our stuff at a discount. They're buying our oil at a discount. They're buying our gas at a discount. So this oil, whether you like oil or not, this oil that's now going to Canadian ports, getting on Canadian ships, is being sold at world price, right? And so we're not taking that Canadian, poor next door neighbor cousin discount, and that's a big deal.
Well, and with everything happening right now down south, I think it's even more important, right? This West Coast opportunity that we have that, going back to Clark's administration, I mean, no one really thought of it at the time. Like, diversity was a word used, but this wasn't necessarily the major push. I think now we should be doubling down on getting everything off the West Coast because it protects us from that.
Total credit to previous BC governments, regardless of political spectrum, whether it's New Democrats or Liberals or what have you, is that they recognized this a long time ago. British Columbia is essentially the only province in Canada that has its export market has maybe even majority. I shouldn't be quoted here, but a significant amount of our exports don't go to the United States. Almost every other province is almost entirely dependent on the Americans. So as we face this threat of Trump tariff, BC is better positioned because of these things. Thank goodness for the foresight of some of our leaders, and thank goodness for the tenacity of guys like Ian Anderson to get these things done. So we are not as much, BC, we are very lucky. We're just not as much a threat as many other provinces in this country.
Big congrats on that project. Another big win, not quite in service until 2025, is Site C. So maybe you can provide a little Byng color on Site C. I know it was an idea in the 80s. Technically, it started in, I think, 2014.
Well, I think there were other plans beyond Site C. Like there was Site Z or something. Anyway, there's
straight to the last letter of the alphabet.
I don't know. There might have been a D and an E and F. I can't remember. But these were all conceived of back in the 1960s under the WAC Bennett Social Credit Administration. And again, foresight. One of the reasons BC's historically had cheap power, which has been our true competitive advantage, is because of the foresight of what was done back then. But this, Site C has been considered for decades. They entered the EA process, I think, in 2014. So it's been 10 years from beginning of process to construction. But there was so much pre-work. You can't say this thing took 10 years. This thing was probably 20 years of work to get to this stage. And so total credit to the folks at BC Hydro and their consultants and advisors to get to this point, because there was serious opposition. A lot of the work that had to be done was not related to the design or the construction. It was all about making sure other folks were happy. And so that's great. But I'll throw in another wrinkle to this because, my grandfather farmed in the halfway in the Peace River country, which is now underwater. So I have a bit of a connection there. And my relatives who all work in the oil and gas sector, and all are generally pro-industry folks, were opposed to it because we probably could have built a combined cycle gas power plant that would take up the space of a few city blocks and produce just as much megawatts as Site C. So, congratulations to the folks for getting that through. But we decided as a province, so we even though we sell coal and natural gas and oil, and those are frankly our biggest exports.
Coal is our biggest export
by volume and by dollar figure, and natural gas is right up there. Those are our biggest exports. But it's like we're embarrassed of the family business, right? We're the undertaker's son who doesn't want to admit what his dad does, even though we have the nicest car at the school. So we could have done this with our own resources that we're selling to other countries to use, but for some reason we're purer than the driven snow, and so we didn't do that, and instead we flooded a valley. And that was a public policy decision.
Whose public policy decision
was
that?
Under Gordon Campbell, right? So again, I'm being a little sort of nonpartisan critical here today because I think public policy decisions in this province are not broken down by left and right. They're broken down by foresight and hindsight. And WAC, the dam structure in our province was foresight. And arguably Site C, under the constraints, is foresight because we knew we were going to run out of electricity. Although when it was being through approval processes, there's all these voices that said we're never going to need that much energy. Now we already realized we're already out of it. But I mean, the Albertans could just build a combined. It's all the same atmosphere. They could build a combined cycle plant across the border and run a power line.
I think we might be forced to build some of those things because we're all driving electric cars now. So.
Yeah, it's Site C is a success for all those people who did it, and congratulations, and I'm glad it's done, and we will all reap the benefits. But the public policy decisions behind its origin, I think they were politically driven.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, there was so many soft issue risks that project had to navigate through, and ultimately there was a lot of land disrupted. There is a lot of land disrupted to do these big dams. It's a mega dam.
So my father's side comes from the Kootenays, and my mother's side comes from the Peace River. So I tell people that they flood all my valleys. So you don't want me moving into your neighborhood because they're going to flood the valley.
Maybe they'll do that with the tunnel.
Yeah.
You never know.
I'll just put a canoe on my roof.
TBC. So that's some good successes. We've had some good successes this year. I mean, some of these projects that are quote unquote successes have actually been going on for decades, but they're completed this year. So we want to celebrate that. What are you thinking as far as future projects go for next year? So what are your 2025 picks? Imagine yourself a year from now, we're like having a glass of wine. What's going to be happening?
I'd love to see another large scale LNG facility on the coast. We've got more gas than we could ever use. The world wants it. In the dangerous world that seems to be the status quo today, whether it's Russia and Ukraine or the South China Sea or what we're seeing in the Middle East, Canada is a secure supply for things that the world wants, and a trusted ally. We could be the supplier of choice instead of countries like Poland having to import gas from a country that from the Putin regime. We could be that. So I would love to see another LNG facility on the coast. Silicim's, the Nisga'a project, is the front runner, and I wish them all the very best of success. But even though this is an Indigenous-led project, we're seeing the same. We're seeing they're even though they're Indigenous-led, they're seeing the same challenges. Massive opposition from certain other First Nations on the pipeline, disagreement with their neighbors. I'm sure because it's very close to the Alaska Panhandle. We'll see our American friends have some commentary about it. So yeah, I would love to see another facility on the coast. Frankly, I think we've got this one and one more in us, and those things could really be key to the economic success of this province. The reality is that the provincial government's $9 billion in debt, and it's getting worse. I think they recognize they're going to have to do something economic. The fastest thing to do, and there are many things you can do in the longer term that will turn around the economy, and I'm sure everybody will advocate for their industry. But the fastest thing you can do is start exporting more gas. Just increase some gas.
Well, and Enbridge is doing that.
So
right?
there's something we'd like to see. Talk about that.
Enbridge they filed that this year, and hopefully it'll be in service in 2026. But they're looking to expand their T North asset, so the Aspen expansion. And I mean, something that people maybe don't give them credit for, so I'll give them credit for it on this podcast, is the fact that actually helps heat people's houses around here. It's an electrical generator as well. So this is helping the domestic need for energy as well as the export of it. And I think too, it's the type of project that can get our economy back on track.
Yep.
And I want to see Enbridge be successful in this expansion. I want them to expand more because
it's fairly low impact because it's existing right away, right? So.
Yeah, and they're really great at consultation. So I feel like that could be one that could get us back in the black on the provincial books.
Yeah. I mean, I agree, and again, relatively probably compared to the economic impact of other projects, it would be fastest and a big impact. So
one that's not going to be fastest and the easiest impact is a coal mine that I'm hoping to see go ahead. So, North Coal didn't go ahead. Maybe it'll be resurrected.
Coal Mountain, I mean, Tech. Well, I guess it's Glencore now. We'll see what Glencore does. That's an interesting story.
That is an interesting story.
But
but
probably don't have time for that. But Glencore, they have Coal Mountain and they have the some expansions of the existing operations.
Yeah, Rocky Creek Coal Mine is another one that's being put forward just outside of Chetwynd. And, met coal is such a dirty word for people in BC. They don't feel good about it, but
they don't want any of your stalking.
But they want to live in a Yaletown apartment that uses met coal to build it.
It's the shocking, again, these sort of crazy things I say to my kids. Milk doesn't come from the store. It comes from a cow. The things you own didn't come from the store. They came from where those products were originally taken from. And our primary exports are natural gas and coal.
Mm-hmm. I hope to see some coal projects go ahead. I really do. I really think that they can add to the export, right? Coal projects, they will eventually have to go into remediation. So we do need new coal projects in BC. And I think a lot of the communities would really benefit from them. And I think they're done in a really environmentally forward way.
There's challenges, no question. I mean, there are, the selenium challenge in the Southeast is real. Let's not diminish the impact of these things. These are big impacts on the land base, but in the context of, it being done elsewhere in the world at a level of safety and a level of environmental certainty that we do in Canada. I mean, listen, the level of safety and the level of environmental scrutiny that those things are under is something you wouldn't find nowhere else in the world. The last bag of coal and the last drop of oil should come from Canada when we finally transition to whatever it is we transition to.
It probably will, because it'll take us a long time to get it out.
We'll still have some left.
We'll still have plenty of coal reserves.
The Qataris and the Norwegians and everybody else who sold everything they have.
It's true, though, because, you look at the Montney even, and there's a lot going on up there right now in Treaty 8 and having a hard time kind of moving any permits through, frankly. And it's tough, because I was talking to a company the other day that's basically taking half of the investment that they had earmarked for that area, and they're putting it into overseas, right? So the displacement of capital with that stuff is real. And
with Site C coming to an end, like we talked about success, with Site C coming to an end, with TMX basically done, and LNG Canada Phase 1 is coming to an end, we have a lot of construction workers who don't have jobs now, or won't have jobs shortly, and we don't have anything to replace those jobs. And that's
the number one employer in BC.
Thousands of people. If we look at the provinces, I was looking at this before, the province's major project list, like major projects that are in the pipeline, to use a pun, they're almost all residential and housing projects, or public sector projects like hospitals, or infrastructure projects like a bridge. Now, those things are all needed. Don't get me wrong, but those things are consuming tax dollars, not creating them, right? I buy a house because I need a place to live. It doesn't generate me wealth necessarily. Maybe in Vancouver, I guess they all do, but that's like we can't run a world-class economy on government projects, government bridges, building hospitals and building homes. We need all those things, but they have to be paid for by something else.
Well, and I look at it like you think about the Massey Bridge or tunnel, and you think about SkyTrain and stuff like that. Very supportive of those projects. I mean, from an economic lens, the Massey Tunnel or bridge, it really was meant and conceptualized because they wanted to increase the transfer of goods, right? They wanted to move
about
goods.
trade.
It's about trade. And same with the SkyTrain. It's about getting people from other parts downtown so that they can be
And get out of their cars.
Yeah, human capital helps the environment, but also helps, the movement of people. But I think when you start to see, it's similar right now to the employment numbers in BC, right? You're seeing private sector employment diminish and you're seeing public sector go up, and those private sector jobs are what create the public sector jobs. So when you start to see that teetering, I start to get really nervous.
Yeah, otherwise it's just Monty Shuffle or whatever you call it. You're just moving cards on the in the game. You're not actually creating any new cards. You're not creating any new wealth. This is just moving wealth around. Now they're very value added, but and certainly those are, again, I would never diminish the importance of these things, but there needs to be something to pay for them, and we don't have Apple or Google or Tesla. We don't have the population to be those, the manufacturers of these things. The Chinese will probably always outdo us on batteries, as they just have, and on solar panels. What are we good at? We're good at this, and let's stop being embarrassed by it. Let's start taking advantage of it and doing it the best way we can, which is the best way in the world. And I think that's what we're talking about. Like, why are we strangling? This is what this podcast is all about. Why are we strangling these projects? Why are we strangling our natural resource sector when it really is the family business?
And it's the thing that helps support all the other industries in BC. So as we close out on this Christmas podcast, we want to talk a bit about policy. So Santa's giving you one thing for Christmas this year. What is your one policy change that you would ask for? Or maybe it's a policy shift, or maybe it's a new policy for Christmas this year, Byng.
Yeah, I'm trying to think about this, because the natural reaction of a lot of business, like, we need a one-window approach, or we need a more...
We already have a one-window approach.
If you talk to them about the amount of times, the Feds back in Harper days created the major project office, and then there's the major mines office. Like this central permitting office has always been like, let's make it simpler, faster. It's been tried. So my ambitions are more simple. A good thing to start with, we've discussed it already today, is get rid of the 10-year deadline for substantial completion of your project. Companies will hold off on construction of a project when the commodity cycles move, and we live by commodity cycles, and we don't control them. So price of wood goes up, goes down. Price of coal goes up, goes down. Price of gas goes up, goes down. If we're going to permit major natural resource projects, we need to allow those companies to enter construction and move to operations during a cycle that works for them. And so if that means that they have to have their certificate a little longer, then that's probably what we should do, instead of starting from scratch again, just to fill another room with another stack of binders. So I think that's a very
simple,
doable thing.
Mine's maybe not so doable. Okay. You want to hear it?
Okay, here come the big ideas.
Here's the redheaded thought. So I will say that I've thought about this, and I want to go a little more molecular than you. So mining, mineral exploration, we talk a lot about it, very close to my heart. I think that the easiest way, other than opening up gas for this summer, for us to see some economic movement, is to think about mineral permits. So if we have clients and others who are waiting 3 years to get a permit or more for a non-invasive drilling permit,
a drill in a guy's backpack. Right?
So I think what the government should do, it's my Santa Claus wish, is put a deadline of March onto some permits and say that if they're not approved by March, then they're greenlit. Just let people do some non-invasive exploration work.
Jurisdictions do that. Like, if you don't have a permit by X date, then you get it.
Yeah, if they don't have issues with the permit, and the reason being is because
given our civil service is growing so much, they should be able to handle it.
There's like hundreds of thousands of new workers in there now, and the part of that too is that mineral explorers, miners, there's such a limited window. You really only have from June till end of September to get things done.
Yeah, we do live in Canada.
Yeah, there's snow at a lot of these sites. So I really think that would, even if you took, say, 50 projects, say each drill is 400,000 to $1 million, that's substantial. That's hiring people.
A lot of little projects makes one big project.
Yeah, right? And if they can remove environmental assessments from other things, I think that's a fair trade for the mineral industry.
Again, we heard the Premier the other day, Premier Eby, say when he announced this, that look forward to more announcements on the whole regulatory front. So again, you said you're going to be tuned in, and I guess we all will. We'll see what happens.
Awesome.
So end of 2024. Merry Christmas, Allie.
Merry Christmas.
We want to mention our main man here who runs the soundboard and
Keelan.
Keelan. So come in.
Not sure if I'm in the shot there, but I just want to say thank you to everyone who's listened this year. I think it's been a big year for us as a company and obviously as a podcast. So yeah, just want to say thank you and happy holidays and happy New Year.
How do you say happy holidays in Ireland?
I've completely drawn a blank.
You're saying with a Guinness.
I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
Merry Christmas.
Yeah, Merry Christmas, everyone. Thanks so much for listening to today's slightly different episode of Primary Risk. We have a really exciting new guest lined up for January. So we have Jason Kenney on for our January episode, former Premier of Alberta
the
and
inventor
former
of the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation, or one of the inventors.
Yeah, we're going to talk to him about AIOC and what it's doing to power the province forward in Alberta. Of course, BC has announced a similar program, so hoping to see that up and running. Please follow us to receive notifications of upcoming episodes. Check out the show notes for any references to major projects. I think Keelan's going to be busy pulling those together for today. And our new episodes are released monthly. So until the next episode, Merry Christmas. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. See ya in 2025.